So tonight we're going to study about King Josiah, or as his Hebrew his Hebrew name is actually Yoshiyahu. There's no J in Hebrew, so all the names that you see that start with J, including Jesus, that's not the way that they are pronounced in the original language. I was super excited to get this assignment because some guys get these assignments that the king is horrible, did these horrendous things, and I got a good guy. Finally, after 6 Herods, I got a spectacular king. So I'm super excited about it. So Josiah lived around 648 to 609 BC. Tragically, he only lived about 39 years and reigned 31 out of those years. So we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 22 tonight. Also, the alternate account is in 2 Chronicles chapter 34. So we're going to start with a little bit of history here. If you remember, in 2 Kings chapter 21, I believe Thomas was covering King Manasseh, who was Josiah's grandfather. And so we're going to talk about the influence, the lineage that he would have come from. This is what is said about Manasseh. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed. And he erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. So tragically, Manasseh was a bad king, was an evil king who was not like his dad, and who actually introduced a ton of worship, idol worship, and seduced the people of Israel, or of Judah rather, to worship all sorts of idols. So this is the grandfather of the king that we're going to talk about tonight. And so we're going to start with the influence. All of us are influenced by our relatives. I actually never met either of my grandfathers, but I have heard so many stories from my mom and my dad that I believe that my grandfathers had a tremendous impact on me, even though I've never met them, because they both died of cancer very, very young. My maternal grandfather was in the Red Army and liberated multiple countries in Eastern Europe during World War II. He was 30 years old, in his mind, a mature man. He was in charge of a small unit that would drag cable for communications from the front lines to the headquarters. And back then, the Russians did not have any radio communications, so it was all done by cable. A lot of times you had to do that under enemy fire. So my grandmother, his wife, widow at the time, received a letter one time from a young soldier who was 18 years old at the time of the war. He served under my grandfather. And he thanked her, even though my grandfather was already gone, because he said that during the most difficult assignments, when it was the most challenging and risky and dangerous assignments, my grandfather never sent his soldiers into battle. He went himself. And so this young man believes that he survived because my grandfather risked his life. Ended up being wounded multiple times, and actually met my grandmother while in the hospital. So I tell you that story just to reiterate, you probably have similar stories about your grandparents or great-grandparents that had a tremendous impact on you. And so King Josiah would have had a negative influence because he came from this line of Manasseh. And we're going to see in a little bit that this tragedy didn't just touch him personally, but also the entire kingdom of Judah. So one would hope that his father would be different. But unfortunately, his father was no different than his grandfather. In 2 Kings chapter 21, we learn that Amon was evil, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, as Manasseh, his father, had done. He walked in all the way in which his father walked, and served the idols that his father served, and worshipped them. Amon was 22 years old when he ascended to the throne of Judah. He lasted a couple months, and then his servants had enough of him, and so they assassinated him. But the people did not appreciate that gesture, so they ended up killing the servants that assassinated Amon, and they installed Josiah when he was 8 years old. He became king when he was 8. If you have children who at one point were 8, or if you remember yourself being 8 years old, can you imagine the pressure of ruling a kingdom at this point? So these were the influences of his dad and granddad. Now I want to take a little bit of deviation from this for a second and talk about something that's happening in our culture. This is not meant to be a political statement by any means, but it seems that in our culture, we tend to excuse things and absolve people of accountability because of something negative that happened in their life, including maybe their ancestry. So as to illustrate the point, this man here, and I can't pronounce his name, so you'll see it spelled out. He's a French national who was a participant of the attacks on 9/11. He was accused of being a substitute for the 20th hijacker. There were 19 hijackers that were actively participating. There was supposed to be a 20th was a substitute. Neither one of those guys didn't get a visa to come to the United States, so this was like a third substitute. And so he did not actually fly in planes into, obviously since he survived, into those buildings, but he was part of the plan. So he's the only person that ever went to trial for the attacks of 9/11, and he was found guilty. However, the jury, when they rendered a 42-page verdict, this is what they said. It's very hard for me to see, but they said there were some mitigating factors that needed to be taken into account in order to be fair to this man and to kind of soften his sentence. So he did not receive a death sentence after being accessory to murder of more than 3,000 Americans. They said that he suffered from unstable early childhood and dysfunctional family life. He had a hostile relationship with his mother that led to his being placed in French orphanages, and the second factor was that his father had a violent temper and physically and emotionally abused his family. Hence, he gets to live after helping kill thousands of people because his daddy was violent and was abusive, and his mother was a difficult person to live with. That is not an excuse. And as we're going to see, King Josiah did not use his ancestry as an excuse to continue promoting idol worship. He did exactly the opposite. So what can we learn from Josiah? This is what is said about him. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in the ways of David his father, and he did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet a boy, he began to seek the God of David his father, and in the 12th year he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places and Asherim and the carved and metal images. So he did not make any excuses. And I think a lesson for us is that we shouldn't either. No matter what happens in this world, no matter how dark it gets, no matter what anybody does around us, we can do what is right in God's eyes. We can walk in God's path and not take a step to the right or the left, no matter what happens. What's interesting in this set of verses is that he's being referred to as the son of David. All those other generations got skipped, right? His granddad got skipped, his dad got skipped, and said he was the son of David because spiritually he was. Just like David, he walked in the ways of the Lord. And so we can take tremendous encouragement from this and not give ourselves an excuse to not follow God is because there's some circumstances in our life, whether it's relationships or financials or health or anything else, there is no excuse to not follow God. So a legitimate question is then, okay, so how did this young boy, 8 years old, learn the right way to walk, right, in the path of God? His dad didn't teach him that, and his grandfather didn't teach him that. So who did? We don't know, but there are multiple options potentially. So his mother, Jedidah, could have been a tremendous influence in his life. We don't know, but there's potential for that. Then Shaphan was a secretary. We're going to see his interaction with King Josiah. Hilkiah, the high priest, could have been an influence. So a whole number of people, but somebody taught this boy what it would be, what the right way to walk in the ways of the Lord. And so I think the second lesson for us is sometimes there are negative influences that we see on people, whether it's in our family or our friends, from people who try to influence them away from the Lord. Let that not dissuade us, because we can walk in the ways of the Lord ourselves and we can teach them. No matter who is trying to undo it, no matter their influence, maybe their influence is stronger than ours, but it doesn't really matter, because we can do the right thing and help them find the way to the Lord. So we're going to continue in chapter 22. Josiah sends Shaphan. So by this point, he is probably a young adult. He sends Shaphan, the secretary, to go to the high priest, and he's concerned about the disrepair in which the temple has fallen into. This is still the first temple built by Solomon. It's about 400 years old by this point. Repairs need to be made, and so he wants to make sure that they're well funded. And so the money that was collected from the people at the temple, he wants to make sure that they are given to the craftsmen. Interesting detail in verse 7 of chapter 22, but no accounting shall be asked from them for the money that is delivered into their hand, for they deal honestly. Interesting principle of leadership. You start with trust, and you only withdraw trust if somebody proves to be trustworthy, instead of trying to make them prove that they're trustworthy. So Josiah entrusts these craftsmen with this money, and they're going to repair the temple. We also know from chapter 21 that not only this temple is in disrepair, but Manasseh dragged all sorts of idols and all sorts of filth into the temple. We're going to see that in a minute, how that gets cleared out. But then a remarkable thing takes place. So when Hilkiah, the high priest, is talking to Shaphan, he tells him that he found something in the temple, in the house of the Lord. What did he find? The book of the law. So there's some disagreement as far as what exactly is being referred to. A lot of the scholars believe that it's actually the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to read in just a second the actual reference from Deuteronomy that calls itself that. Some people believe that some scholars believe that it's not necessarily just the book of Deuteronomy, it's the entire Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But regardless, they found a portion of God's law, and that was a tremendous event. So if we read Deuteronomy chapter 31, and starting verse 25, Moses commanded the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, take this book of the law and put it by the side of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against you. So where was this book supposed to be if it's Deuteronomy? Where do you say they put it? Right next to the Ark of the Covenant. And where is the Ark of the Covenant supposed to be? In the Holy of Holies, in the temple. So the fact that they lost it tells you something about it. What kind of mess was this temple in that the high priest of God did not know where the book of Deuteronomy was? It is a heartbreaking statement that the house of the Lord was in this kind of disrepair, disarray, mismanagement, and the worst thing of all, it had idols from top to bottom that Manasseh and other kings dragged into it. So what a heartbreak. But this is a glorious moment because they do find this book. And Shaphan, the secretary, reads it, and then he brings it to Josiah, and Josiah reads the book of the law. We can scarcely imagine what this would be like. And it's nothing against us, but we have access to the book of the law in every shape and form possible. We have it in written form and in every language. We have it on our phones. We have it on our iPads. We have it, every version in English, every version in every other language. It's hard for us to imagine what it would be like if the book of the law or the Bible just disappeared one day. None of us had a single copy of it. How we would long to read the words again, to really embrace them, to really be led by them. We have a treasure in our hands or in our pockets that I think sometimes we're tempted to take for granted. When this man read the book of the law, he was so moved by it that he tore his clothes because he realized that he and his nation did the things that this book specifically prohibited, that they did not follow this law. He was completely humbled and heartbroken. So he sends out his trusted advisors to go and figure out what needs to be done. So they end up going to the prophetess in chapter 22 and starting in verse 14. And so actually, let me back up a little bit. Let me just read this text. This is his reaction of this righteous man. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes, and the king commanded Hilkiah the priest and Anakam the son of Shaphan and Akbor the son of Micaiah and Shaphan the secretary and Isaiah the king's servant, saying, "Go, inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah concerning the words of this book that have been found. For great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book to do according to all that is written concerning us." Imagine the pain that he felt that his dad and his granddad, what they have done that was against God's law and what was written in this book, and it brought on the entire nation God's wrath. And he knows it, and he feels the weight of it. So they go to this prophetess, and starting in verse 22 of chapter 22, this is what she tells. This is what she tells them. Actually, I'm sorry. Starting verse 16. Thus says the Lord, "Behold, I will bring disaster upon this place and upon its inhabitants. All the words of the book that the king of Judah has read, because they have forsaken me and have made offerings to other gods, that they might provoke me to anger with all the work of their hands. Therefore my wrath will be kindled against this place, and it will not be quenched. But to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord, thus shall you say to him, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, regarding the words that you have heard, because your heart was penitent and you humbled yourself before the Lord, when you heard how I spoke against this place and against its inhabitants, that they should become a desolation and a curse, and you have torn your clothes and wept before me. I have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace, and your eyes shall not see all the disaster that I will bring upon this place." And they brought back word to the king. So this evil that these people have committed under the leadership of their kings of bringing idolatry will not go unpunished. And the Lord said that his anger will not be quenched. But because Josiah humbled himself and he wept before the Lord, and he tore his clothes, and he was humble that the Lord is going to spare him from seeing the disaster that he's about to bring on his people. So the disaster will come after the king is gone. And that was his reward. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 23, then the king sent, this is the reaction of the king after he heard these words. And the king sent, and all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem were gathered to him, and the king went up to the house of the Lord, and with him all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests and the prophets, all the people, both small and great. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that had been found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and with all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people joined in the covenant. The words that are highlighted, that are in bold, that he made a promise to keep the statutes with all his heart and all his soul. What does that remind you of? What verse? Yes, it's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So interesting enough, if the book that they found was Deuteronomy, he's behaving as if the way that this book taught, which was to love. So if we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, in verse 4, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. So Josiah is doing this, and he's making a commitment himself, but also on behalf of the people, that they're going to follow God's law and what is written in the book that they found. What's interesting is he's not just giving them commands as their king. He's not saying this is what we're going to do because I'm in charge. He's pointing them right back to this treasure that they found, which was God's law and God's word. And so he's fully committing himself with his entire heart and his soul and his might to following it. And he wants to stave off this disaster that the Lord is going to bring. We're going to see the end result of his effort, but he's making the best effort he can make to really turn himself and his people especially towards God. So this is absolutely remarkable. So many prophecies in the Bible are somewhat generic. They can be interpreted, if the interpretation is not explicitly given, they can be interpreted different ways. There's a prophecy in 1 Kings chapter 13 that names Josiah, that uses his name in the prophecy that was made 300 to 330 years prior to him ascending to the throne, which is absolutely astounding. So the context here is that Jeroboam, who was an evil king, who is responsible partially for bringing idolatry to Judah, is an unnamed man of God is visiting him, a prophet. And he makes this prediction, this prophecy, that we're about to see actually fulfilled. So 1 Kings chapter 13, starting in verse 1, and behold, a man of God came out of Judah by the word of the Lord to Bethel. Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make offerings. And the man cried against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name. And he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who make offerings on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign that the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes thereon shall be poured out. So this prophecy was made over 300 years before Josiah was born. And so here comes the cleansing. This is the most remarkable reform that any king of Judah has ever undertaken. As we read through chapter 23 and we see all these false deities of every Canaanite tribe, they had all these different ones, and they were all present. The people of Israel and the people of Judah have adopted them all, the whole pantheon of these false gods. Some of them, the ones of fertility, like Asherah right here, entailed sexual promiscuity and cult prostitution. We're going to see in just a second that cult prostitutes lived in the house of the Lord. I mean, I can't imagine a more of an insult to God than to conduct this kind of behavior in a house that was made to be dedicated to Him. So as we read through, just think about not only what Josiah is doing to get rid of all this, but how far have the children of Israel and Judah have fallen. They were God's special people that he led by His own hand out of Egypt. He fed them with manna. He fed them with quail. He took care of them hand and foot. He brought them to this land. He cleared out the inhabitants. He gave them the land of milk and honey. And they whored after the idols. They intermarried with Canaanites. They've forgotten the Lord. So Josiah does something remarkable. He doesn't just sort of dismiss some of this and get some of these idols out and leave some in. He goes completely nuclear. So let's just read and be in awe what this man has done. We're going to start with, let me see where we start. I guess we'll start verse 1 of chapter 23. Actually, no, we read that. So, okay, verse 4. And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second order and the keepers of the threshold to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels made for Baal and for Asherah and for all the host of heaven. So they worshipped stars. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. So pause here for a second. He took all these idols, burned them, and ground them to dust. And then he carried them to Bethel. I've read that the significance of this is, for one, Bethel was not in Israel. It was actually, I'm sorry, it was not in Judah. It was actually just across the border in Israel. But Bethel was a center of idol worship. The one that's where other kings have built altars specifically for these foreign gods. And so they're carrying this dust and these ashes all the way across Judah into Israel and depositing them there. And he deposed the verse 5, the priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in the high places of the cities of Judah and around Jerusalem, but those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and the moon, and the constellations and all the hosts of heavens. And he brought out the Asherah from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem to the brook of Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, and beat it to dust, and cast the dust upon the graves of the common people. Okay, we'll go pause here. That seemed super strange. Why would he take this dust and sprinkle it on the graves of common people? I'm not sure what the significance of that was. It seemed kind of almost unfair until you read the same account in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verse 4. And they chopped down the altars of the Baals in his presence and cut down the incense altars that stood above them. And he broke in pieces the Asherim and the carved and the metal images, and he made dust of them and scattered it over the graves of those who sacrificed to them. So the people that symbolically, he took the idols of these people that were dead and buried, sacrificed to, and he said, here, these are your gods. It's just dust and ash. Verse 8, and he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah and defiled the high places where the priests had made offerings from Geba to Beersheba. And he broke down the high places of the gates that were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which on one's left at the gate of the city. However, the priests of the high places did not come up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they ate unleavened bread among their brothers. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no one might burn his son or his daughter as an offering to Molech. I'm not sure if there's anything more abhorrent as far as idol worship. Obviously, there was sexual promiscuity, but to burn your own children, as a parent, my mind I cannot comprehend that. Josiah's granddaddy burned one of his uncles. So Josiah decided that's never going to happen again. There is a valley. This is not a picture of that. I couldn't find a picture from that valley, but there's a valley called Gehenna in Jerusalem, where Topheth apparently is like the cemetery to these children, where they were burned and then they were buried. This particular one is in Tunisia, right across from Italy in Africa, that practiced the same kind of sacrifices to Molech. It stands to this day. We're looking at stones that receive the blood and the dust and the ashes of burned children. This is how far the children of Israel and children of Judah have fallen. But Josiah said no more. So he destroyed places like this. He said he defiled them. We're going to see in a minute what that meant. And he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance of the house of the Lord, by the chamber of Nathan Melech the chamberlain, which was in the precincts. I'm going to pause here. In 2019, archaeologists in Jerusalem found this seal that was used to seal documents. So what you would do is, if you had a letter, you would have some soft clay, and you would seal it with a special ring. And then when it hardened, it was like a tamper-proof, right? So when the recipients would receive it, if it wasn't broken, then nobody read the ring. The ring has an inscription that in Hebrew is L'Natan Melech Eved HaMelech, which means belonging to Nathan Melech, servant of the king. Now, we don't know if it's exactly the same guy that's referenced right here, but nobody else in the Old Testament has ever been named this. The time frame fits, so it would be amazing if the archaeologists found a personal artifact of somebody who is mentioned right here in 2 Kings 23. So that was a ring that quite possibly belonged to this guy that's mentioned here. And verse 11, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire, and the altars on the roof of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars that Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord. He pulled down the broken pieces and cast the dust of them into the brook Kidron. And the king defiled the high places that were east of Jerusalem, to the south of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built for Ashereth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of Amorites. We'll pause here. Did you notice all of these idols of all of these people that are mentioned? And some of them were built by none other than King Solomon himself. How sad. But Josiah broke in pieces the pillars and cut down their Asherah and filled their places with the bones of men. I think that's my understanding is that's how he defiled these places. When it said defiled, different things come to mind how one could do that, but apparently there's so many references made to the fact that he took the bones of dead men and placed them on all these altars and things like that. So that's the way he defiled them. Now we get to the prophecy. You remember the prophecy 300 years prior? That the altar at Bethel is going to be torn down. That's going to be the sign. There it is. Moreover, the altar at Bethel, the high place erected by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, that altar with the high place he pulled down and burned, reducing it to dust. He also burned the Asherah, and he sacrificed all the priests of the high places who were there on the altars and burned human bones on them. Prophecy fulfilled. It is grotesque what he had to do. He took the man that served these idols and had them killed and burned their bones on the altar. It's ugly. It's unpleasant. But that's what idolatry does. That is the cost of idolatry. A lesson for us is we don't serve Baal, we don't commit sexual immorality under the Asherah pole. We don't burn our children to Molech. Other idols in our lives that are much more subtle than that. Because if we have idols, this is what they're doing to us. We should really learn this lesson. And sometimes tearing those idols down are just as painful as what he had to do. Then he does something absolutely magnificent. He reinstitutes Passover. So, as you know, my family has Jewish roots. It is unthinkable that the Jews stopped taking the Passover. The most defining event of their history was the exodus from Egypt. And the reason that they got to live is because they listened to the Lord and they put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts, and the destroyer passed over them and their children. They have stopped commemorating this event. And not only they did that, but apparently the previous kings had some feeble attempts at reinstituting the Passover, and neither David nor Solomon nor any other king was able to successfully do it until Josiah. Now you can understand how excited I was to get this assignment. This man is absolutely incredible. And the king commanded all the people, "Keep the Passover of the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of the covenant. For no such Passover had been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel, or during all the days of the kings of Israel, or the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept to the Lord in Jerusalem." He's 26 years old, and he gets his entire nation to keep the Passover the way it was meant to be kept and to honor God. If I am 45 years old, almost, I guess that is over 26 age, I should be able to at least get myself and my house in order. If a 26-year-old can do that for the entire nation. Starting verse 24. Moreover, Josiah put away the mediums and the necromancers and the household gods and the idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might establish the words of the law that was written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. Wow. What a commendation. Once again, there's a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 6. He has fulfilled what the Lord wanted. He wanted someone to love him with his entire heart, with his entire soul, with his entire mind, and this 26-year-old did it. What a commendation that he that there's no king greater than him before or after, including King David and King Solomon. Because what he's done, he took this book that he found that belonged to God and he just followed it. We talk about doing this ourselves. We talk about this book as God's word. Do we prove it by following it the way he did? And then this is the heartbreak of his life. His dad and his granddad were evil. His sons turned out to be evil as well. He was bookended by people who did not respect the Lord. He was not able to influence them. And that is heartbreaking. And he was not able to save his nation. They were too far gone. The Lord told them he was going to punish them and that his wrath was not going to be quenched. So we read this tragedy, about this tragedy here in verse 26. Still, the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. And I will cast off the city that I have chosen, Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. What a tragedy that Manasseh, who repented himself, led his people in idolatry to the point where they are going to be destroyed. And while it might seem that Josiah, after all of his reforms, after the fact that he served the Lord with all his heart and soul and might, that he destroyed all these idols, that he respected the law, after all of that, his boys were evil. He himself died in battle at the age of 39. And the Lord punished his nation the way he promised to punish them. That might seem like a failure, but Josiah was not a failure by any stretch of imagination. He did what he could, what a man can do. For himself, for his children, and for his nation. May we do the same. Thank you.